Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we will answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 26th edition of Crop Talk, and it's looking like some areas have been getting some rain and some areas still are in need of rain. So hopefully we'll either get some rain to get some of those crops and pastures going, and maybe areas that have been getting rain, maybe they can share with the rest of us and go from there. But anyways, today I thought it was a good idea to talk about the crop residue burning program, and Timmy O'Shea is going to be on, and he does a fair bit of work with the program, and talk about the need for it, how it works, and kind of the ins and outs. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to go to the crop scouting panel. There's been some questions coming in. I'm sure there'll be questions as we're going through Timmy's presentation, so we'll try to answer all those as we go. But from now, we'll just flip it over to Timmy, and we'll get started with his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lionel. And sharing my screen. Can you see it okay, please?
Perfect. You bet, Timmy.
Great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Today is July 26th, so I thought, a good time to talk about crop residue burning as we approach harvest period. And today's presentation would focus on 5 main aspects. I would start with just looking at what controlled crop residue burning program is and why there is a need for one. How does it work, and who manages the controlled crop residue burning program, and just some general thoughts around straw management. So that's what I'm going to end up with. So to start with, in terms of what the controlled crop residue burning program is, the program decides the burning authorization times for crop residue, and it's within the legislative purview of the burning of crop residue and non-crop habit regulation. So this regulation is under the Environment Act, and for folks that really enjoy reading some of these regulations and acts, I'll put a link to the act. It's not a really long act, but it does specify what the controlled crop residue burning program is all about. So I thought I would give a brief introduction to just the regulation. The regulation is based on 4 main regions, divides the agricultural region of the province into 4 main regions. So the Northwest, Southwest, and there's a combined West Lake / Interlake, as well as Red River Southeast. So this is just a map that I screenshot from the website. The website has a better looking map, but just to give you an idea of where the zones are. So the Northwest, the Southwest, the West Interlake, and then the Red River Southeast. So all our regulation and authorization times are often based on these various zones. And then in terms of the active period in which the controlled crop residue burning program, it goes from August 1 to November 15, although the regulation also does specify what should happen year-round from November 16 to July 31st. And in terms of prohibition, night burning of crop residue and non-crop plant materials in yards, right-of-way, ditches, native pasture all year round, it prohibits the nighttime burning. So no one is allowed to burn overnight. And the responsibility is always on the person burning their stubble. So the fire must be supervised at all times. Precautions must be taken to protect persons and properties, and the smoke from the burning should not pose any unreasonable risk. I'll go into more details about the regulation in subsequent slides, but this is just a quick overview. So why is there a need for the controlled crop residue burning program? I'll just go through a brief history, just a quick history. This actually started just about 30 years ago now, 1992. The fall of 1992, we had large crop harvest, and we also had humid weather with poor ventilation. So with having such a large harvest, we had a large biomass, and with it coupled with the damp late harvest condition, it resulted in many producers choosing to burn their residue. And this, in combination with poor smoke dispersion condition, resulted in heavy smoke that covered several parts of Manitoba for an extended period of time in the fall of 1992. And as you would expect, the public reaction from these conditions was actually unprecedented, and it forced the government to take an immediate action. So on October 8, 1992, a state of emergency was declared, and the government imposed a 7-day ban on stubble burning. So that was on October 8th. So there was a 7-day ban on stubble burning. And after that, from October 14th to November 3rd that year, a measure was put in place, and there was meetings between producers and various departments within the government, the Emergency Measures Organization, and the intent was to control the burning of crop residue just for that fall. And over the winter, a crop residue burning advisory committee was formed to balance the two sides of this issue in terms of understanding the need sometimes for producers to burn excess stubble, but also maintaining the health and wellness of the general population. So that led to the enactment of the Controlled Crop Residue Burning Program regulation that was enacted in the spring of 1993. So this program has actually been going on for about 30 years, or for just a little, about 30 years now. This year will be the 31st year of running this program. And just fast forward, it's been largely successful in ensuring that the needs of producers that want to burn stubble, as well as maintaining the health and wellness of the population, is maintained. In 2020, as many people would remember, we had COVID outbreak in the just late winter, early spring. And for the first time, the program actually did spring daily recommendation, because we issue recommendation and permits only in the fall. Between August 1 and November 15 is the mandated or legislated preview of the program. But because of the unprecedented health risk of COVID-19 in the spring of 2020, we also ran spring daily recommendation. And so this just gives a quick overview of the need for the program. Okay, so how does the controlled crop residue burning work? The first thing we do is daily from August 1st to November 15, we do a detailed smoke dispersion and forecast review. We want to ensure that we understand what the smoke direction would be, or the result of any burning activity that occur in the province. So we have this internal smoke dispersion forecast tool that we used. This is mainly just for us in Manitoba and internally to make decision. And it has a date, and it uses a forecast from North American Mesonet model. It can forecast up to about 48 hours to the future, so about 3.5 days into the future. And what this panel is showing, this first one is showing the ground wind speed. So I have put it for today at 5 p.m. You would likely see an increasing wind speed in the southwest, northwest corner of the province. And you can also select the RM, and based on the RM selected, it would show us what the ventilation conditions would be. So this is one of the tools that we use in deciding if a permit should be granted or not, or in deciding the times. So for instance, for a day like today, although it's still July 26th, but if this were to be between August 1 and November 15, on a day like this, we would likely authorize stubble burning in the southwest and northwest region, but not in the southeast or Red River region, because the ventilation rate is quite poor. So this is one of the tools that we use. And one of the things to note is looking at this image. This was a photo I took earlier this spring, and um, you can see the smoke rising, and then it got its plateau and just went flat. So this is due to what we call the mixing layer. So the mixing layer is the height. Oh, I need to go back. So the mixing layer is the height, the planetary boundary layer, the height at which smoke would rise, and it would actually just stop rising. So on a day like this, when whoever was burning something at this location, it was a day with very poor mixing layer. So mixing layer is one of the tools we look at as well. The day may look clear and nice and beautiful. The wind direction may be ideal, but if the mixing layer is poor, then it won't actually have a very good lift into the upper atmosphere. Other review information that we look at, this is the PM2 particulate matter 2.5 information out of the UNBC, University of Northern British Columbia, and they have various network of sensors in conjunction with Environment Canada. And this actually shows the level of particulate matter in the atmosphere. So it's mainly like an air monitor. And you can see with this, Manitoba, and this was for yesterday, actually, July 25, and Manitoba, for the most part, closer to the southeast, and Winnipeg area was okay, but as you go further to the Interlake area was not as good. It was worse over northern Saskatchewan, central and northern Saskatchewan. And the last item that we look at is this NOAA's hazard mapping that looks at the smoke direction and the smoke impact. And you can actually see a very good correlation over mid to northern Saskatchewan, where they have the heavy smoke plume correlating with the poor air quality. So these are the various things. So sometimes the sometimes our app can actually show that, yes, you have very good ventilation occurring for that day. However, if there is too much smoke in the air already, we would likely not authorize any burning for that day. So we do look at different tools to make decision. So once we look at those tools, we set authorization times. Authorization times is basically the times in which, if the conditions are okay for stubble burning, those set the parameters. According to the regulation, it cannot start before 11 a.m. So 11 a.m. is the earliest that it would start. So if you see any smoke rising before 11 a.m. from anywhere, you can be pretty sure that that is an illegal burning occurring, because 11 a.m. is the earliest time, and then it can go as far as into sunset. Legislatively, we are allowed to go 2 hours after sunset, but historically, we've almost never had authorization times go past sunset. Again, we look at ventilation conditions and other parameters. To know what the authorization times would be, so from August 1, you can simply go on our website under the crop residue burning program. I usually say the easiest way, instead of kind of memorizing this link, the easiest way is on Google or any search engine. Just type in Manitoba crop residue burning program, and it would lead you to this page. On that page, you can click on daily message. So this daily message is updated every day from August 1 to November 15, and it would have the message for that day. It would indicate it will indicate the authorization times and if crop residue burning is allowed in your zone. Alternatively, I know for some people that want to reduce their screen time, and we want to help you with that as well. So you can also call this 1-800 toll-free number, and you can listen to the authorization time. So again, every day, this is updated between August 1 and November 15. There are days that we issue multiple day authorization. If for the next 2-3 days, with the conditions are okay, we may actually issue 2 or 3 day authorization as well. Okay, so after we set the authorization times, we issue ministerial order. and ministerial order, because this program is actually under the Environment and Climate Department. However, the minister has delegated if some of us as employees to exercise the powers assigned to the minister. So we established the authorization time. So this is what the order looks like. And there is the initial preamble that shows that the minister has appointed myself or someone within Manitoba Agriculture to exercise those power and establish the burning period. But I want to call your attention to 3 aspects. So this is an example from last year, August 1 through November 15 last year. Daytime crop residue burning is not authorized except by permit in 10 municipalities. So all these 10 RMs are close to Winnipeg, and they are always closed. They are not authorized except by permit. So permit is required if you reside in any of these RMs, any of these 10 RMs close to Winnipeg, if you want to burn stubble. For the other RMs that are not so close to Winnipeg, there are times in which permit is not required, and you can simply just go ahead and burn stubble, depending on what the authorization times are. So for this day, in the Red River and Southeast zone, for those other areas that are not within the 10 RMs, it's possible that we may or may not request, or you may or may not require permit. For that day on August 1, it says that burning is not authorized except by permit. So even if you are not within that 10 RMs, as long as you are within the Red River and Southeast zone, you do need permit before you are allowed to burn stubble. And the third aspect here is the West Interlake and the Southwest. Southwest, actually Northwest zones. So it's Southwest and Northwest. For that day, that area, those areas actually had very good ventilation conditions. And in those areas, we set authorization from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. in all municipalities in those zones. So if any producer is in this zone, they actually don't need to fill out a permit to burn stubble, as long as it does not start before 1 p.m. and all fire and smoke must be extinguished by 6 p.m. So this just really spells out that some areas do need permit. Sometimes the entire province needs permit, or all the zones in the province needs permit. Other times it's different. So every day may be different. And that's why we always recommend that you need to check the daily authorization times to know what is happening that day. So after the ministerial order is issued, again, you can go ahead, the producer can go ahead and burn with caution if there is no permit required in their area. But if permit is required, they need to fill out a permit application. Again, the 10 RMs close to Winnipeg always require permit. Even if the ventilation conditions are great, they always do require permit. So if a permit is required, this is what the permit looks like. Again, it's on our website. You can download this permit or fill it out online and simply email to us, or you can also call. If you call this number, we do realize that some producers may actually not have access to maybe a printer or email, although email is usually the best, but over the phone too, as long as you have all the information required for the permit. We have our staff that will be ready to take the information over the phone. But again, you need to establish that permit is required for that location. And if permit is required for the location and the ventilation conditions are okay, we would issue, this is what the permit looks like. We would issue the permit to the applicant. And the applicant needs to have this permit on them every time when they are burning stubble, because we may have law enforcement or environmental officer coming by to check. So they need to have this permit on them, either in hard copy as a printed out paper or on their phone. But a permit that has been issued by one of our staff needs to be there on the ground. Now, the fact that a permit has been issued does not insulate the person from being responsible or liable for damages. So the owner, so this is directly from the regulation, and mainly the owner or occupier of the land. I'll just jump to this B part. The burning begins and end in the burning period. So again, everything that is being done must start and end within the authorization times. And then the burning must be supervised by the owner or occupier, or a person authorized by the owner or occupier, and that person ensures that all precautions that are reasonably necessary to protect persons and properties of others from the fire are taken. We don't want a case in which a stubble that is being burned kind of just go out of control and burn other infrastructure around. So it's very important that every precaution must be taken. You need to have a fire guard consisting of a strip of land that is tilled or substantially free of readily compostable material. You need to ensure that you prevent the spread of fire, and not just the fire itself, the smoke resulting from burning of crop residue as well. We need to ensure that that is not posing any unreasonable hazard to the safe operation of a vehicle on the highway, if it's close to an highway, or to other residents that may be close by. So this is very important, that the fact that a permit has been issued does not mean that the producer or whoever is burning stubble, they still need to take responsibility. So what happens between November 16 and July 31? So this is legislated as well, although you don't need a permit to burn between those times. So if a producer is, let's say today, July 26th, wanting to burn, they don't need to apply to us for a permit. However, they still do need to take responsibility, like what I've gone over in terms of the fire, making sure that a safe fire guard, making sure that the smoke does not pose unreasonable risk. And it also cannot begin earlier than sunrise on that day, and must end not later than the sunset. So between November 16 and July 31, any burning that wants to occur needs to occur between sunrise and sunset. I would always recommend, though, that if a large strip of land is going to be burnt, that they still check with our program so that we can help with advising if it's actually a good day for ventilation or not. Again, always the responsibility is on the person that wants to burn the stubble. So who manages the controlled crop residue burning program? I mentioned that it's mainly under the purview of the Minister of Climate and Environment, and they have designated, so that's currently Minister Kelvin Klein, and he has delegated the permitting authority to Manitoba Agriculture. So that's where we come in, because we are more closer to the producers who understand their needs more. So we do the permitting. However, the enforcement is still done by the climate and environment officers. So I work with other 7 staff within Manitoba Agriculture in this program, and staff from environmental compliance and enforcement within the climate and environment department. They carry out the enforcement. So if we get a report of an incident, let's say someone is burning stubble before 11 o'clock, between August 1 and November 15, that's definitely an illegal burn. The Department of Climate and Environment officers may decide to contact RCMP or municipal police, and those will be in charge of enforcement, and it may carry a fine of up to $50,000. So it's not cheap. It's better to stay within the purview of the law. Some cities, I should mention that some cities and towns and municipalities may have their own burning bylaws, and it may prohibit open air burning, or it may require additional permit. So we always recommend that before you burn, yes, this is provincially legislated, but depending on the conditions at the time, it could be based on wildfire, forest fire happening close to that RM. They may have their own additional restriction. So please, on our website, we have detailed information about and links to other information that may help if you want that information. I know the city of Winnipeg also, if you are burning within the boundaries of the city, they require a special permit as well. Okay, so I'll just wrap up this presentation with just some few thoughts on straw management. Burning crop residue is actually not cheap. It does have quite an impact. There's impact in terms of loss of organic matter. There's increased potential for soil compaction, greater potential for erosion because you've taken away all the vegetation covering the soil. So it leaves the soil exposed. There's loss of valuable nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur, name them. So there's a loss of valuable nutrients. And there's also damage to soil structure, which lead to poor drainage. And think about the cost. So think of what happens to soil microbial population after burning. There's going to be lower microbial activity. So um, in as much as we want to tell producers, there are other alternatives, there are other means that you can straw management options that you can explore, such that burning, if possible, shouldn't be one of the options. But if there is no way out at all, it should be like the absolutely last resort. And in some areas, they do burn more than others, and that could be due to again, the heavy clay. I know in the Red River, heavy clay soil, and in some years we have, very wet vegetation that just can't be walked in. And in those years, we do tend to get a little more request for stubble burning. So think about straw management as part of your overall farm management plan, not an afterthought at harvest. So try to think about incorporating, soil health and stubble and crop residue is definitely one of those. You can leave standing stubble or chop them and spread on the soil surface. Again, it does really help with making sure that you keep the soil in place and it's not moving everywhere. You can also incorporate straw into the soil, again, building up your soil organic matter. It's a very win-win situation with that. And if you have way much excess, you can also use the A and straw listing service within the government. And this service, you can simply just put in the information online, and it's a listing service, and it's pretty much just bring buyers and sellers together, such that you see someone that has excess straw or hay that want to sell, you contact them and you are able to at least ship that out that way. So this is just a very quick overview. We are approaching August 1 next week, and we will be starting the crop residue burning program again this year. So I thought it's just a timely information to tell producers out there. I would wrap up by saying that for the most part, I think less than about 5% of producers in the province actually do burn. They don't do that every year. Occasionally, they would do that just to manage as part of their farm management. But for the most part, we've been seeing a decline, which we think it's good in terms of really just doing or looking at other alternative methods of incorporating your stubble and straw into your overall farm plan management, such that hopefully at some point we may not even have a need for this if it's not an option that many producers are considering. So we are happy that over the years it keeps going down in terms of the number of producers that are applying to get permit for stubble burning, and we hope that the trend continues to go downwards as well. With that, I want to thank you for your listening attention. I'll be happy to take any question that you may have.
Okay, good, Jimmy. Thanks for that information. There has been a couple questions here, so I think you might have touched on this one. So guidelines as to how you can burn safely. Are fire guards required? What type of fire guard? And so I think you might have touched on that one a little bit.
Yeah, I can quickly speak to that. So the regulation doesn't want to be too prescriptive, as you would imagine, right? Like we don't want to say this is exactly what you need to do. What we always say is that you need to make sure you put a very good and reasonable fire plan, such that you account for all conditions. And then, by the way, if the wind speed, and in the permit that we issue and in the order, we always say, the wind speed should be, I think, between 10 and 30. It shouldn't be more than 30. I need to check it again. But we do have some of those advice that we put in. And if we note that that day isn't a good day, we would, for the most part, actually just say that no one is authorized to burn except by permit. When we put the word except by permit, that does help us to control how many people we issue the permit to. I know we've had producers tell us that, my neighbor got the permit today, why can't I? And sometimes we may want to regulate the number of permits we issue in a particular RM, again, just to make sure that we don't put in too much smoke into the atmosphere. So yeah, we don't want to be too prescriptive in terms of the specificity of the fire guard that is required, but we expect that producers will make reasonable preparation and reasonable plan to ensure that the fire is contained to just the stubble that they want to burn.
Okay. Another one, and this is one I get a lot of times too, is what about wasteland and sloughs and cleaning up those type areas? Does that fall under getting requirements for burning permits?
Yeah, so basically it's the regulation is the burning of crop residue and non-crop herbage. So oftentimes I know it's like, okay, what is non-crop herbage? So as long as it's a vegetation that can burn, and it's like kind of a crop, it would be under the purview. So yeah, I would say slough, if it's something that is, vegetation, even if it's non-crop, it doesn't have to be wheat, canola, oats, but as long as it's a vegetation that can burn, yeah, it would fall under the under this legislation.
Okay, and then we're seeing a lot of bush clearing and piles. What about those type of things?
Yeah, so if what is going to be burned is less than an acre, actually you don't need a permit for that. There is an exception in the regulation for that. So if it's something that is not like a big, and we always say, if you're unsure, definitely contact us, because every case would be different. But if the straw accumulation of the area does not exceed an acre, or if it's an harvested or an unharvested windrow that does not exceed, 6 feet in width and 100 feet in length, and it remains in the field, so we do have some of those exception to the legislation. But yeah, we always do encourage, if you're in doubt, definitely reach out to us and would help.
Okay, and this one with all the forest fires that have been burning and all the warnings about air quality, will there be any permits available this year?
It's on a case-by-case basis, and as everyone knows, things can change quite quickly. So we do actively monitor what's happening, and that's why I showed a few of the things we monitor, not just within our province alone. We do have, we monitor what's happening in other provinces, actually down south as well. We monitor what's happening on a larger area. So I can't really say that there will be permit or no permit. I would expect, just like every other time that we've done this, I've been with the program for the last 7 years thereabout, and there will be days in which, and we've had years in which most of the days were actually close to permit, and we only had very few days. And there have been years in which ventilation was great and we didn't have much issue with smoke inundation from forest fire. So it's really hard to prescribe what would happen this fall, but I'd say we'll wait and see. But I just want to let producers know, those that are applying, that when we say no, it's not because we want to be mean. That's not the intent. It's just we want to make sure that it's a balancing act to ensure that the smoke would disperse very well. And even if it's going to disperse very well, we want to know what's happening in other places, other jurisdiction, because we don't want to keep adding, fuel to the fire, both literally and figuratively.
Okay, that's great, Timmy, and I can't let you go without asking you the one question about the weather. What do you think the weather's going to do from here on in? Do you think we're going to see any major rain, or what do you think things are going to do?
I know. Anytime you ask these questions, I always say, if only I know. Yeah, no, I think again, I always look at what the long range forecast is going to be for the fall. And for the most part, for precipitation, it's been, and I would say this year, and I would say more so than most years. I'm yet to crunch the numbers specifically, but anecdotally, we seem to be having most of our precipitation this year mostly as storm. And I think it's been a while that many areas have received those nice soaking gentle rain that, just rains for hours and hours. But this year, most of the rain we've received have been storm and they've been localized. So I know just yesterday in the city, Winnipeg and Steinbach, and I think Steinbach actually had about 3 inches, some areas almost 3 inches within, few hour within an hour actually. And then we had the hailstorm in the southeast corner of the province and some areas in Interlake. So it seems so localized that it's hard to say which areas would get what. I know in the southwest, Findlay, like it I think listed, some areas have been so dry as well, quite dry, and it's telling on some of the crops. So this fall, in terms of precipitation, Environment Canada isn't really showing any percentage in terms of probability either way. It's showing that there's equal chances of being dry, wet, or just at normal. But for temperature, though, it's actually showing, and I think we did really enjoy what we had in the first half of this month in July, in which things were cool, at least cool-ish, and that did help many crops to recover from what could have been a heat stress if we had had a normal July temperature. But I think I think things are changing right now. We had the warm front moving in from the west this week, and I think next week is supposed to be still in some areas quite warm, other areas kind of more seasonal. But the long range forecast from Environment Canada, looking at what would happen for this fall, they're actually calling for above normal temperature. So I know further to the southwest corner of the province, it's about 50 to 60% chance of being above normal. But then once you move to the Interlake and to the southeast, it actually has high as 70% probability of being above normal. So usually when it's getting to that range of 60, 70%, there is a high likelihood that that's what we would see, that for the next 3 months, July, August, well, mostly late July, August, and September, that we would likely be above seasonal in terms of our temperature.
Okay, well, good. Well, thanks for that, Timmy. There was a lot of good information and really timely about the crop residue burning program. So thanks for coming on today and giving us that update and a little bit of a weather update as well. So thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get into our crop scouting panel, and we're going to get into some questions. And these questions, this first question is going to relate to a lot what Timmy said. And Marla, I kind of targeted this one towards you. I guess by burning or baling and removing straw, what is it actually costing a producer? And by tilling in the straw or letting it break down, how is it improving the soil?
All right. Just wanted to show this here, which hopefully will share. There we go. Looking at nutrient losses, I think it's important to kind of review back some work that John and a few colleagues did in 2001. Granted that, the crops that are listed here, wheat, oats, and flax, and may not be the most relevant crops that we might be seeing seeded now over 20 years later, but I think that the information that's provided here is still very helpful in that when we talk about nutrient losses, we're really talking about the biggest percent of losses when we burn is going to be carbon and nitrogen. That's kind of lost in that overall. So if we are looking at burning straw, note that any amount of the nitrogen that are here in pounds of straw, and it might not seem like a lot, but there is a loss over time if you're looking at, say, 24 pounds in that, like 1 ton per acre of wheat, 11 in oats, 31 in that flax. But really, these numbers are very close to 99, 100% because of the fact that this is where you're going to see the biggest loss. The other one that we can lose fairly readily is the sulfur that is in that. And so we might not be as worried or thinking about sulfur. Maybe it's more of an issue if we're dealing with sandy soils where sulfur deficiencies may show up, but just recognizing that those losses can occur. The ones that we don't lose to the same extent really are phosphorus and potassium. And so a lot of that ends up being left behind in the ash. Now, granted, that ash can be concentrated in certain areas. So if we're, dropping straw behind the combine and then lighting it on fire, then note that you can end up with these kind of more concentrated areas along where that ash is. So I just wanted to pull that up to show, again, that really we're losing carbon and nitrogen. And when we lose that nitrogen, then that's the type of thing that we look at replacing. The other part of your question there was regarding, what happens if we are choosing to not burn, or what happens when you leave that straw behind. And this is just that general reminder that when you have a crop residue that has a C to N ratio, the amount of carbon and nitrogen in there being greater than 25:1, that is going to favor immobilization of nitrogen. So with the wheat straw, the oat straw, any cereal straws, they're quite often in that, 80:1 range, sometimes 60, 80, even 100:1 range. We are going to have nitrogen fertilizer that gets applied being tied up by microbes to break down that old crop residue. This is a short-term loss or tie-up. It's not forever. But again, some of the nitrogen fertilizer that we apply ends up being tied up by microbes. If you are tilling that fertilizer, or tilling the fertilizer and tilling therefore the residue in, what ends up happening is we have more of that nitrogen fertilizer again being utilized for that immobilization because it's being mixed in with that crop residue where the microbes are trying to break it down. If that, say if you're in a no-till system, and so all of that residue is sitting at the surface, and then you band that nitrogen fertilizer in, it means that more of the nitrogen fertilizer that's being applied is kept kind of away from that crop residue, and therefore it can be favoring, crop uptake as opposed to being tied up. But again, that immobilization, it's a short-term loss. It eventually will be released once that high C to N ratio crop residue is gone. When you have a lower C to N ratio, so something under that 25:1, so if you're dealing with like a legume crop, that favors mineralization. And what that means is that the nitrogen that is in that crop residue ends up being released for plant uptake. It doesn't end up being tied up during that period of time. So you won't have that fertilizer being applied following, say, a soybean or pea stubble, pea crop, having that nitrogen, the fertilizer nitrogen tied up. So really, when we're talking about burning crops, we're talking about heavy residue crops or crop residue, heavy residue crop residue, things like corn, big wheat crops, things like that, where you have more of that potential for immobilization. Again, it doesn't mean that immobilization means that nitrogen is gone forever. It's a short-term tie-up, but it is something to be aware of, that sometimes some of that nitrogen fertilizer we're applying then is being utilized during that period by the microbes and not necessarily getting to next year's crop.
Oops. Okay, Marla, there's a question that has come in. Is the loss of CNN from burning dependent on soil texture? Will it change depending on the texture?
Good question. I'm not actually sure whether or not there would be a relation to soil texture as much as there might be, depending on the type of crop that or soil you're growing and how much biomass you actually create. So say on a heavier clay soil, we have the potential to grow more if you've got a higher organic matter soil with a lot of water holding capacity, that can end up impacting that. The more biomass you grow, the more there is to kind of burn off, the more nutrient has been kind of taken up, that nitrogen being taken up from the soil. Sandier soil might not see that same loss overall, just because of the fact that it won't grow that same high amount of biomass.
Okay, good. Thanks, Marla. Okay, next question for Dennis Lang. And with the I guess the drier situations some of our soybean crop has been going through. I just wanted to, maybe get you to comment regarding what are some of the critical stages of growth for soybeans, and I guess related to moisture and or temperature. Just your comments as it's kind of getting into that stage now where it's podding and pod fill stage. So Dennis?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to share my screen here and just pull up
You bet.
something to give me a minute here. Okay. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Grower Staging Guide. This can be found online, and just do a quick Google search. But what we're looking at right now is I'm just going to get my pointer here. What we're looking at right now is our soybeans are in that late R3 into R4. And the first thing to always note when you're doing staging on soybeans, and once you're in the reproductive stage, so anytime you start seeing flowers or further, you always want to start counting from the top of the plant and count down the plant. Whereas early in the season, we always count the trifoliage from the bottom up. So right now, if you're at the full pod stage, and you're counting down from the top, anywhere in the uppermost nodes, you're going to have pods that are three quarters of an inch long. If you're at R5, and R5, I think a lot of the beans will be coming into R5 in about 7 to 10 days. You're going to be looking at the same thing, counting down from the top. And what you're looking at is the seeds that are about 1/8 of an inch long when you open up those pods. So that's the staging that we're at now and will be in the next couple of weeks. And that is probably the most critical time for moisture. Looking at after R5, where the seed is starting to form, generally then there's no small pods left. Things are just really moving along. And but typically right now is where moisture is really critical, because you can be dry before this stage, but getting into rainfall now and is a real benefit for the yield at this stage. So that's usually when I do my yield projections in September. I always tend to look at what the moisture conditions are like in late July, early August. If you don't get rains during this time, then you'll typically see the plants just finish off maybe a little. Some of the small pots will finish off and dry off and drop off. We've seen that before, where you just don't get the moisture. But right now is what you'd be looking at for key timing for moisture right now. So, and I would say anywhere from 1/2 an inch to an inch would be really beneficial right now for any soybeans that's really looking for moisture at this time.
Okay, Dennis, so when you're out in the field right now and you're looking at your plants, so you said we should be looking from the top going down right now for development of the pod?
That is correct. Start from the top, and then the uppermost node, and then count down 4 nodes. And then I usually try to open up the 4th node because that's going to be the most mature. Because if you go down into the canopy, you'll probably have seeds that are well ahead of this. But that's not how the staging is done in soybeans. It's usually the top uppermost nodes that you're looking at.
Okay, and so if we're starting to lose some pods, you'll notice those that be the top pods will be the latest ones filled then?
That would be correct, yes. Yeah, you'd start to notice that when you we do see that from time to time where they start to curl up because if they don't get moisture. So it'll be interesting this year because the rainfalls are very sporadic. And the area that I'm in close to Emerson right now, we ended up with 3 inches last night. And when you drive around, there's very little water in the ditches. It was still pretty dry here, but yet you go to Altona, and their moisture, they didn't get quite as much as we got here, and Carmen got pretty much almost nothing or they didn't get anything last night. So it'll be interesting with the yields. No, it'll be a little tougher to judge yields because there's going to be these wide ranges of moisture levels during this time period.
Yes, no, that's going to be interesting as we go forward for sure. So,
For sure.
okay, good. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. Just throw it back to you there, Lionel. I stopped sharing, so.
You bet. Okay, so Now, I got a question here yesterday, and I didn't get a chance to make up slides. So I was just wondering, is John Gaboski, are you on today?
Yes, I'm on, Lionel.
Okay, yeah, John, I was just wondering if you wanted to make maybe mention. I did let you know about the crickets that I was seeing in the call I got from a producer, and then also maybe a quick comment about aphid levels. Some guys are starting to see some levels picking up in some of their cereal crops.
Sure. Okay, so first, crickets. So again, just put things in perspective here. Now we've actually got 17 different types of crickets in Manitoba. The one that we dealt with a little bit last year was the fall field cricket. It seems to favor the same conditions that the grasshoppers do. So we've had several years that seemed good to build their population. So we've got a very heavy population of fall field crickets. Now, what happened last year, we saw some very abnormal type of feeding from them, where they were actually climbing up onto plants like canola, wheat, flax, and feeding right on the grain. We had a very wet start to the season last year, but then a very dry end. And aside from looking for seeds and things on the ground to feed on, they also like a bit of moisture. So I think what happened last year was you had a very heavy cricket population. They were a little bit moisture starved, and we saw them climbing up onto plants and doing things we often don't see them do, like feed on canola pods and even cereal grains. I think what was happening was, again, this combination of high population, lack of moisture, and that had them trying to seek out moisture from things they normally wouldn't feed on. The fall field cricket is very much an omnivore. They like seeds. And in fact, there's been several studies showing them to be very good weed seed predators. They like larger seeds. So things like redroot pigweed, lamb's quarters, quackgrass, crabgrass, lots of different seeds is one of the things they will feed on. They'll feed on a lot of the dead, dried plant material on the ground. They will feed a little bit on live plant material. Again, sometimes it might be them trying to get moisture out of things. Another potentially good side to them is they are very much omnivores. So if there's grasshopper eggs and something that they can get at, they will feed on grasshopper eggs as well. How big a part of their diet it is, it's hard to say. It will probably vary, but they do feed on some insects, grasshopper eggs. They've been recorded feeding on apple, maggot, pupa, alfalfa, weevils, several different insects. Whether or not we see them climbing plants again and feeding high up on the plants, it probably will depend on what is available lower down and how much moisture might be available. I don't think crickets are going to become a regular or annual problem in crops. I think that was maybe a one-off last year. We will see. Something you can keep an eye on, but I'm not expecting them to be a major concern. Regarding aphids and cereals, so we've got English green aphid and oat bird cherry aphid in. So they both blow in. They don't overwinter here, and we've been seeing levels build. Now, one thing to keep in mind is your crops, your cereals are susceptible up until the soft dough stage. Soft dough and beyond, unless you had very extreme populations, you're not going to get economic damage from aphids beyond soft dough or even at soft dough. It's prior to soft dough when they're acting as another sink for the phloem sap that they can be economical. So staging is critical there. We use a threshold of 12 to 15 per stem on average. Scouting tip though, English grain aphid in particular can be very tricky to scout for because they will get right inside the heads and they're right next to the stem. So you do need to, you can bend back the head a little bit to try to see if there are aphids near the stem, or take some heads and shake them over something. Have a tray, a bowl, or a piece of stiff cardboard or something in the field with you that you can shake some of the heads over. And you can get a good sense that way if you're near that 12 to 15 per stem threshold or not. Oh, the other thing I should mention, the tricky part, if you are above threshold and you're not yet at soft dough, your insecticide options are very limited. You've got two registered active ingredients, dimethoate and malathion. Dimethoate, the pre-harvest interval is 35 days, which means 35 days until the crop is cut. So for most people, that's not going to be an option, which leaves you malathion. So the options are few. And my pitch to any chemical company reps listening in, we really, really, really need a selective aphicide with a short pre-harvest interval registered for aphids and cereals.
Okay, good comments, John, and especially about the staging wise. So you said soft dough stage. Anytime after that is you're good to go, right?
Exactly, soft dough and beyond, you're good to go.
Great, thanks for the comment, John.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, just a couple slides to kind of round out the day today. The MASC came out with its estimated seeded acres by commodity. These are for insured acres. So when you look at the differences there, you can actually see that some crops have taken some major jumps and some crops have taken some major declines for this year. So something just for your information, if you're wanting to see where we're sitting as crop acreage in Manitoba for this year. Where are we sitting for our spring wheat quality across the province? As you can see, we've got quite a bit in that good to fair range. There's some pockets that have started to drop off significantly, especially some in the southwest here. So some of those have dropped closer to the poor or in the poor range, but not a lot of acres, but some. And I know it mentioned last week that or 2 weeks ago that we were starting to see hilltops and areas where crops were starting to whiten or kind of premature ripen in sort of thing. And I think those areas have gotten larger, and we're actually seeing a lot of that in canola as well. Now we're seeing a lot of the drier areas where you can see the flowers kind of just turning a whitish color and aborting off. So we're definitely going to be seeing some reductions in yields and I think pretty much in crops across the board as we get to those areas in the field that normally would be producing, still pretty good yields are going to be dropping off a bit. So something that when my travels in the last week or so here have definitely shown. Something that I took a couple pictures of. This is a pasture in the southwest here. I've never seen pastures this brown in my life, so that's why I thought I would this time of year. So I thought I'd take a picture of this one, and then also a wheat field that just ran out of moisture early, and tillers died off, and just definitely showing the effects of the lack of rainfall. I think this area has not gotten 2 inches of rain since spring, so it's definitely dry in those areas, and a lot of salvage crop is going to be happening in some of those areas. Couple of the events that are still ongoing, PCDF August the 2nd and MCDC on August the 9th are diversification centers open houses and field days. So definitely take an opportunity to go and attend those. A lot of good information and a lot of positive feedback about the ones that have occurred already. So if you missed the first two, there's still 2 left to take in. Our field crop disease guide still available. The crop extension specialist. So if you're having problems, you'll see a lot of us out in the next week. We've been out already, but we're going to be going out to a lot of fields. We're in the middle of our disease survey time of year, so we're out checking fields. So if you got questions, and give us a call. We might be in your area. You can stop by and talk with you regarding what's happening in fields. The livestock people. And just a quick point here, Timmy did mention about the hay listing service, and if you do have hay or straw that you're wanting to put on the hay listing service, call the 1-800 number, or go to one of the ag service centers. Or call the ag service centers. They'll be able to take a lot of your information and get that put up on the website. So if you're going to have straw or hay for sale this year, or if you're looking for hay or straw, definitely go to the website. But if you want to put some information on there, either call the 1-800 number or get a hold of the MASC offices. And that takes us to the end of the day. I'd like to thank our presenters, and thanks for the questions that have come in. And we'll see you next week, August the 2nd. Let's hope the people that need rain get it, and the people that want it to stay dry, you can send it the other direction. So thanks for attending, and see you next week.